Hey, good morning, everyone. We are so glad that you have joined us for City Changers. It is always a pleasure to connect with you online and as well as pastors that are here with us as we sit with Dale Yurton and get to really hear some life-giving principles on how we as pastors, how we as City Changers can truly become who God has called us to be in this community, because He loves the people in our towns.
That's right.
And He's placed us as pastors and as church leaders to really help bring them into the love of God in the church. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dale. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
As we
Thank
talk
you.
about life-giving churches.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back together in our group again. This quarantine thing gets old, doesn't it?
Amen.
And I'm happy to have you here in person, as well as those of you watching online. We are doing a series on what we're calling life-giving churches. In fact, I intend to do this through the rest of this year. We'll have 12 lessons in total that we'll be dealing with life-giving churches. And the lesson today I'm so excited about is creating, facilitating organization. I let that soak in a little bit because that's some big words there. Creating a facilitating organization. What we're talking about basically is we need to create structure within our churches. Structures which make it easy to grow. Now, I know we would say, well, you know, we're not creating things that make it hard to grow, then why isn't it growing? You know, that would be the next question. How are you doing as far as the growth cycle? We need to create structures that make it easy to grow. And the thing I want to start with that is always the elephant in the room is the question was asked when they was doing this survey of churches that are around the world that are growing, and they asked them, is your church traditional? And it was amazing, the response. The churches that are declining, they are not growing, they are dying. 50% of them said, yes, we consider our church to be traditional. When they looked at what they called the high quality growing churches, these are the ones that are you know, they've got life in them. I'm calling them life-giving churches. 8%. What a contrast here between the growing and the non-growing. Those that are full of life and those that are dying. Traditions. Now, the moment that you mention the word tradition, we all have different ideas. We think, you know, of other people have the bad traditions. It's always the way we think. It's always them. And the things we're doing, they're good. You know, we never see what we're doing as a tradition. But the truth is, we live in a world where everything around us is aging. The truth of it is, not one of us are getting any younger. We're all getting older. When I look in the mirror, when I go to shave or comb my hair, I see an old man looking at me, and I go, where did you come from? Because the truth is, everything in this life has got a time attached to it. It's an aging process. So think of traditions like we think of the leaves on the tree. This is a good concept. Like the leaves on the tree, as long as the leaf is green and it's alive, then the tree holds on to it because it's feeding the roots. It's causing the tree to grow. I love springtime because it's always a time of new growth and new life, and it's my favorite time of the year. You should embrace the traditions as long as it's alive.
Right.
As long as it's feeding the tree. But whenever those leaves turn brown in the autumn, what does the tree do? It just turns them loose, lets them fall to the ground, and they actually decay and become fertilizer for the roots. So they're still serving the tree, but they let them go. Now, you know what we usually do because we like it. We're comfortable with it. And so we'll go to Walmart and buy us some green paint and super glue, and we stick those suckers right back on and paint them green. You know, it's not working now. We're actually serving the tradition rather than the tradition serving us. See, tradition is actually traditionalism, I should say. It's the opposite of what I'm talking about here with a facilitating organization.
Wow.
It's the opposite of it. And the truth of it is every one of us have tendencies to this because, as I said, we're all aging. And traditions are not bad as long as they're serving. They only become a problem when we're carrying around dead weight. That's no longer serving. What used to serve well is not working anymore. And so traditional churches, their focus is on the past. They actually begin worshiping the past. Now, they wouldn't say it that way. We're too polite and too religious to say that. You know, we don't want any idols. But the truth is there are so many churches that have idols that they're holding on to. I remember this is a classic example. I won't even name the state, but this is a true story of a church that had done well and it had grown, and it started out just a little country church, and so many people come to the altar and receive Christ and such. So they finally needed to build a new building. They built a brand new building, and they could get rid of everything except the altar, that old wooden altar that they had. And so it didn't fit the new church, though, anymore. So what they did, they painted that altar gold. I tell you, this is a true story. They painted that altar gold and mounted it up on the wall on the platform. Now, you talk about tradition because, you know, that's where I got saved. That's where, you know, and they go back all these precious memories. Now, I know that's an extreme story, but that is really true. And, it illustrates what so many of us end up doing. We begin worshiping the past. This is where traditions get us in trouble.
Wow.
When we allow our traditions to become sacred. And the moment that our traditions become sacred, we're in trouble. I don't care who we are, because, and a lot of things, if you have to explain it to the visitors that come to your church, your guests, and you got to explain what you're doing and why you do it, you've got a tradition that you're holding on to that's no longer working, and so you have to explain why you do what you're doing. That's the mistake, when we allow them to become sacred. Or it's well said, traditionalists do not care what time it is. They're only interested in what time it was. I've reached the age, I understand what the man said when he said, the older I get, the more I like it the way it used to be. But that's the problem. It's not the world it used to be. The world is changing, and people are changing, and communication styles are changing. And if we don't make the changes, then we become ineffective. We don't have facilitating organization. We have traditionalism. Now, here's the second thing I want to talk about. We must develop a healthy attitude toward church structure. And the reasons I'm pointing this out is because most people don't have good attitudes toward it. For instance, what I call the revivalist leader, and that's what I grew up as a young evangelist. I felt that revival was the answer to everything in the church. So, and I was very sincere about this. But revivalist leaders, they view church structure as something that's unspiritual.
Right.
Let's get back to something that's spiritual. Right. Something, you know, we want the
more altar calls.
That's right. We can feel the Holy Spirit. You know, sing my favorite song again. You know, whatever. We view it as being unspiritual.
Right.
That's not a healthy attitude.
Right.
And then we have what I call the mechanical leaders. Mechanical leaders are the people that think that if I can get the right program, it's going to make my church grow.
Right.
And they're always looking for they go to conferences and such,
Right.
looking for a new program. They can come home and
Do it
push
this
on their
way.
people, try to do what they saw being done. The mistake is, they make the mistake that the structure, the program,
Program.
is the church.
Right.
And that's a mistake. The church is not a program. The church it's not a structure. The church is the body of Christ, which is people.
Right.
People. That's what it's all about, seeing people's lives changed. And so the mechanical leader, they think that structure is the church. But life-giving church leaders, they recognize structure is the system which gives order to the life of the church.
Excellent.
Now, I really hope you let that soak in. Let me say it again. Life-giving church leaders, they recognize structure is simply the system which gives order to the life in the church. In other words, anything that is alive is growing. If it's not growing, it's dead, friend. It's dead. If it's alive, then there's going to be growth. It's going to be, and I'm not just talking about numerical growth. I'm not just talking about financial growth, no, I'm just talking about growth. You've got to be growing somewhere. And at my age, I'm not going to get any taller. I'm actually getting shorter, as you know. I can grow out. I can't grow up. But I can't grow younger, but I can grow wiser. And so what I'm saying to you is, you've got to be growing somewhere. And as I've said so many times, the older I get, the harder it is to stay alive. So I've got to be looking for ways that I can be growing. If I don't, then I start dying. It's always that way. Now, here's one of the things that the life-giving churches, these churches that are growing, they're full of life, they ask the question, how many of you have, and I'm going to use the terminology, this is my own words, have departmental leaders? And I use the word departmental simply because I'm talking about the different groups, the different ministries, that every church has got them. Well, you can call them whatever you want to. You can call them life groups. You can call it a ladies' prayer meeting. You can call it a men's fight club. I mean, there's all kinds of words, but you're just talking about different ministries, different departments in the church. How many of you have departmental leaders that are training other leaders? And it was shocking. The churches that are dying, only 32% of them could say that we have departmental leaders in our church. Of the churches that are alive and growing, 85% of them have departmental leaders. So they are creating a structure that will reproduce itself. See, what we discover in ministry is what used to work well doesn't work anymore.
Right.
That's the reason I wear glasses. It's the reason I have hearing aids, is because what used to work well doesn't work anymore, and so we got to get some help. Now, this is what life-giving church leaders, they simply are watching for things that are hindering the growth of the church. In my slides here, I'm using a picture of someone that is watering a plant. Why would he do that? Because he discovered the soil's too dry. We need to put some moisture to it. And so he adds the water to the dry soil so the plant will continue to grow. Now, it's a simple premise, but that's what we do. We're always looking for things that are hindering the growth of the church.
Right.
That become a problem to us. It used to work well. It's not working well anymore. So it's become a tradition.
Right.
All right, here's the third thing I want to emphasize. The third thing is the opposite of order is disorder. Now, that is so simple that it is profound. The opposite of order is disorder. So what we've got to do as leaders is create systems, facilitating structure, organization, that makes it easy for us to communicate.
Right.
To communicate. As we grow, communication becomes more complicated through the growth. Let me give you an illustration of just a baby. On a baby, there's only about 6 to 8 inches between its heartbeat and its feet. For you and I as adults, it's about 5 feet from my heart down to my feet. A lot farther to push the blood. And that's why so many people begin to have problems in their feet, because there's just not the proper blood flow there anymore, and it begins to create problems for them. So as the church grows, it becomes more difficult to communicate the heartbeat of the church, to keep them in tune, keep everybody on the same page. We use all these expressions, but that's what we're talking about. The opposite of order is disorder. Now, let me give you an example here from nature. And I'm looking at my slide here. My slide it's just a picture of healthy cells in the body. What they have done in this picture, the doctors have taken and they've created a slide, and it looks like a honeycomb is what it looks like. Every cell is touching every other cell that is around it, and it's like that honeycomb, like the bees build, that every corner is touching another cell. It's in perfect order. That's healthy cells. Healthy cells. Now, this next picture that I show you here on the slide is of cancerous cells. The slide of the cancerous cells, there's no order. Everything is broken down. Oh, you still got the cells, but they're not touching each other. You'll have 1 or 2 cells that are joined together, but they're not all fit together like a honeycomb. The honeycomb is just a beautiful picture of one big honeycomb with all the individual cells. In cancerous cells, the cancer has caused the structure to break down.
Right.
To put it very simple, all that cancer is cells in rebellion against the law and order of the body. They're doing their own thing. They're growing their own, we call them tumors in the church. We usually call them ministries, We're developing our own ministry, and we're actually feeding off of the body instead of feeding the body. Oh, I hope you're listening to what I'm saying. Yeah. So the cancer it's cells in rebellion. They're not in submission. They're not in authority. They're doing their own thing. And so that's all that cancer is. It's lawless cells that are out of harmony.
Right.
With the body.
Out of unity.
Oh, I tell you, that is profound. Now, here's the lesson that I learned through this. Dead and living organisms are distinguished by their structure, not their substance. I got to repeat that again because that is profound. The dead and living, I'm talking about healthy cells and unhealthy cells, the cancerous cells. What's the difference? They're still cells. They still have a nucleus. They still have all the parts. And the same is true. Oh, I see this in the church so much. They believe in the same Jesus that you and I believe in. They read out of the same Bible that we read out of. They pray to the same God that we do. But the truth of it is, many of them are in rebellion. They're doing their own thing. It's not working well. What's the problem? It is not the substance. They believe in Jesus. They read the Bible. They pray. It's the structure that is the difference. They are not in submission to anyone. They're not under authority to anyone. And you can ask them. They've got their ministry, and you say, well, who is your pastor? Well, I remember a young man called me. He told me that God had called him to be a prophet. And I asked him, well, who is your pastor? Well, I don't have a pastor right now. And, well, where do you attend church? Oh, well, I go to a house church, and I knew immediately. And I think he was very sincere. I think he really loved Jesus. But I told him, you may have a great gift, but your gift is going to destroy you if you do not find your place in the body and come under authority. It's not the substance, it's the structure that is the difference.
Can I interject here?
Yes, you may.
This is one of the things I want to implore those of you that are watching online, because we all as pastors see that right now, because we are doing church online, in the homes, that the pushback for so many Christians today is to do church at home. And, you know, I don't have to go to a building to be a Christian. That was never the debate. We need to really hear these words, because the pushback is going to be in these next upcoming months of, I no longer go to church, that God has told me that I need to do church at home. And listen, while that is not a bad substance, the structure's wrong. And you still need to be submitted to a church body that you get fed from and that you contribute to, not only financially, but your giftings, your callings, your talents. You can still do that from home if you have the right structure. And so I just want to implore those of you watching online to hear what God is saying in this time, in this season, because this is so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah, I want to preach rather than teach, because it's, you know, it is so important, and there's good people. Wow. It's not they're bad people. Absolutely. They're good people, but they're wasting their lives, their gifts, their talents, because their ministry. Right. And the truth is, they're acting like a cancerous cell rather than a cell that is harmony with the body. Wow.
So good.
Let me give you the fourth thing. Now, what we have to do as leaders, we must develop clear lines of communication. Now, that's what I'm defining as is going to develop our structure. Our structure is clear lines of communication. So there has to be authority, there has to be submission, there has to be, you've got to have all these things involved in this process. But what we're after is to develop clear communication. How can we do it? Here's one of the things in their study of these life-giving churches, these churches that are growing around the world. They ask them the questions, how many of you have regularly scheduled workers' meetings? Now, you can call them different things. You can call it a prayer meeting. You can call it a men's meeting. You can call it youth ministry. I mean, all the different things that we do to minister to people's needs. You have regularly scheduled workers' meetings. Now, I don't believe in just having meetings for meeting's sake, but it was interesting to see the difference. In the churches that are full of life and growing, 78%, almost 80% of them said, we have regular scheduled workers' meetings.
Right.
The churches that were dying, declining, 25%. 25%. What a contrast. It shows so clearly the problem that they have. They don't have good communication. And so what I'm going to call it unstructured interdependence. I hesitate to use the word, but we could call it an independent church. But
what?
Yeah, I got to be careful here. But unstructured interdependence, there are no clear lines of communication.
Right.
In other words, somebody wants to know something, we don't even know where to go get the information. We don't have the go-to person for that. No clear lines of communication, and I show the graph here on my slides is just a combination of lines going every direction, and basically everybody's doing their own thing. And I've seen churches like this. They have no concept of authority in the church, no pastor in the church. Everybody is a minister in the church. Basically, everybody's just doing their own thing. And that is not clear lines of communication. One of the best ways to keep a church structure healthy is by meeting regular for times of discussion.
Right.
Not just imparting information or making some announcements about something, but getting input, getting feedback, interaction with the people that are involved in whatever that particular ministry would be. There's got to be clear lines of communication for discussion of new ideas and thoughts. Now, this is what I would call structured interdependence. The other was unstructured. This is structure. And you'll see in my graph here that I have, and you can name each one of those little groups. You could call it a ladies' ministry, a youth ministry, a worship team. You can call them whatever you want to call them, but they're simply a ministry that's functioning within the church. And you'll notice in those, there's real tight communication. There's a lot of talk and interaction that's taking place. Right. But then there's clear lines from that ministry to another ministry. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I've seen happen sometimes in churches. The youth ministry begins to believe they are the church, or the worship team, they believe, well, we are. This is where God's really moving. God's blessing the church just through it. No. You're just one part of the body. And so there's got to be clear lines of communication between the different ministries. This is what we're calling structured interdependence. And this is the principle. The principle is the whole is greater than its individual parts. In other words, you can take my body, you can dissimulate me, you can cut off my fingers, you can cut off my hands, you can take my eyes out, my ears out. I'm not worth more when those members are taken away. I'm worth less. Those members that are now, the finger that's cut off is going to die because it doesn't have the heartbeat. It doesn't have the blood flow. It cannot function out there by itself. But when you put it all together, the whole becomes more than its individual parts. The potential that is there just by every member finding its place. Now, I want to close this lesson by talking about structure, thinking of it like a skeleton. A skeleton. The skeleton teaches us so much about church structure. Bones, for instance, are very strong, but they are unyielding. They're not flexible at all. That's one of the things that makes them so strong, is because and when you look at the bone cells, I mean, they are so densely compacted together. That's what makes them so strong, but it also makes them very unyielding. And it's why some people do not like church structure, is because they don't like law. They don't like order. They don't like anybody telling them what to do. I guess none of us really like that. We all push back on that, don't we? So, but bones are very important because that's what protects the vital organs. You look at your structure of your body. Your brain is surrounded by a bone. That's why we call some people boneheads. They're just simply saying they don't have a brain. But the truth is, every one of us have a skull that protects the most important organ in our body as far as being able to function, and everything operates out of the head. You see with your brain. You hear with your brain. Your ears send the information there, but it's the brain that's processing. It's protected with a bone, with a skull. Every vital organ. You have your lungs, your heart, your liver. You're surrounded with this rib cage that is around it. that's what the bones do. They provide protection for these vital organs. But here's the problem with bones. They can either empower us. For instance, we're sitting up because we have bone structure, because of our skeleton. Without our skeleton, every one of us would be an amoeba in the floor, you know. Just we couldn't stand, we couldn't walk, we couldn't. Bones can either empower us or they can enslave us. That's what arthritis does to people. Their bones don't bend, they won't flex, they won't move anymore. They lock up, they freeze up, and suddenly you become a slave to the skeleton, to the bone structure. That's what's happened to a lot of churches. What used to empower us has now imprisoned us. It's enslaved us.
Wow.
Oh, you can learn so many things from this. The scripture in the book of Ephesians 4:16, a powerful verse where he said, the whole body joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. Well, that is a key verse when you're thinking about the church, the body of Christ. Every joint supplies. It's properly joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. And so joints become places of communication. It's where one ministry touches another ministry, or one member touches another member.
Oh, that's so good.
In the joint, what every joint supplies. So if you don't have good communication, guess what? You've locked up there. You froze up. You're no longer functioning as a body. You become enslaved like a prisoner. Now, here's something that I noticed that I think it's very important for us to understand in the body of Christ. Where do the blood cells that feed our body, where do blood cells come? Because the truth is, we have cells that are dying by the thousands every day. That's why we had to take a shower. That's why we had to clean up. It's because we get dirty doing nothing. Because cells are replenishing themselves. Where do new blood cells? And I think every pastor ought to be interested in this. Because where are you going to reach new people? Where are you going to win new souls? How are you going to reach our community? Blood cells are developed in the marrow of the bone. In the marrow of the bone is where blood cells are developed in the body. The blood cells that are developed inside the bone are released into the body through the joints of the bones. Where bones come together is where the cells are released, blood cells, into the body. Now, I think we ought to really pay attention to this. Because if we don't have proper joints, and what happens so many times, the joints are not functioning properly. You look at the bones, and I'm giving pictures here of bones on the screen. They're always smooth and round wherever they're touching the other. And there's always the cartilage. There's this like gel substance between the bones. That's where the blood cells are released into the body. Without that, if you have bone to bone, it's going to be painful. And that's what happens in a lot of churches. It becomes very painful. Bones that are broken and that are exposed, that's not good. Our skeleton should be internal, not external. If you can see the bone, that's not good. It's grotesque, actually. It's something that causes us nausea. We don't like to even think about it. Where bones are broken and exposed, it's always a painful, harmful situation. So the bone structure, and that's the way it should be in the church. The structure of the church should be invisible. You don't see it, but it's always there. It's what causes everything else to function properly. And if it's not functioning, if we haven't got good communication, we don't have good order, without that, we're never going to be able to fulfill what God's called us to do. So what I'm talking about here is the balance between structure and life. There's got to be a balance in that. If the structure becomes overpowering and you begin to think that the structure is the church, you're soon going to have a dead church. It's soon going to be a traditional church. There's not going to be life in it. It has to be releasing new life into the body. Now, one other thing I want to say about this, the bones, before I leave this, is as we mature, many of our bones fuse together. For instance, when babies are born, babies have 280 bones. But adults only have 206 bones. Now, what happened to those 74 bones? They fused with another bone. And you're going to find that as a church matures and grows, that you don't have to have all the individual parts out here, that now some of those parts work together with another part and they fuse together. They're still there. They're still functioning, but not individually. They become stronger together. And so as the church grows and matures, you will find some things that you used to need, you won't need that anymore because everybody now is functioning properly. And so what I'm saying is, life-giving churches develop good communication systems. They have good structure. They've got a good attitude structure. Everybody knows their place. Everybody's fulfilling their role. So I've talked long enough. Let's have some feedback from you. I want to hear from you. Just send us your questions, your comments, and we'll do our best to try to respond.
So one of the questions, as Dr. Dale Yurton said, go ahead and send those questions in. We will do our best to answer them. One of the questions that did come in as we talk about structure and unity in the church, it's a common thought that those submitted to authority don't have a voice. They're just supposed to be yes people and do what the leadership says, but in the desire not to be a dead church, and we know that that type of structure obviously is not healthy. The church was never meant to be a dictatorship. Right. It is a body that we all contribute. I love that point. If you missed it earlier, go back and rewatch this, how the joints are connected, because as a pastor, one of the things that I desire to do is to connect our different ministries to think beyond themselves. Our worship team has to understand how nursery works, because if not, then it blows nursery out of the water, because we spend 45, 50 minutes in worship and they're screaming babies in the back. We've got to be connected to understand ministry. And so with all that being said, Dale, what are some ways that open communication can flourish, that it's not a dictatorship, that we can have unity even when we don't always agree? What are some of the ways that we can promote healthy communication?
I think if we always agree, it shows we're really not communicating. For instance, think of the body again. Your heart is filled with blood. Your lungs are filled with air. Your stomach is filled with acid. Now, you reverse that. You put blood in your stomach, you got problems. You put acid in your heart, you got problems. So each one of these has its own function to the body, but that's where it makes it valuable. The whole becomes more important than the individual parts. Okay. And as a pastor, no, you got to think of yourself as a general practitioner as a pastor. You can't be a specialist in just one or two things. Right. Even though we all have greater gifts in certain areas. You've got to think of yourself as a general practitioner, and you're trying to help the whole body. It's your job to keep the heart beating, to keep the stomach digesting, to keep the lungs breathing. It's your job to keep that in harmony and in balance. And so the heart is never going to agree with the stomach. Because you try to put food in the heart and you'll kill it. Yeah. There has to be, but yet you've got to have a heart. Mm-hmm. And so as a pastor, all the different gifts that God gives to the body, you have to balance them and not become extreme in one area or the other. It's why when I do another message on church government and say, you don't think of the church like a hospital. Yes, we do minister to sick people, but we're not a hospital. And I've seen some churches, that's all they do.
Sure.
They feel that's what God's called. That's not a healthy church. Or it is not a factory where you're producing a lot of stuff. I mean, you're just,
right.
No. We're not a factory. Yes, we're going to do some good things, but we are a family. And so you think of yourself as a father. You think of yourself, yes, you pay attention to your wife. No, she doesn't always agree with you. And sometimes she's right and you're wrong. But we learn from each other, so we become the facilitators again. There's a word we've been discussing. We keep this thing functioning and flowing together. We're developing good lines of communication.
Wow, very good, very good. Yeah, Pastor Mike Rambo from Family Worship Center. So good to see you here this morning.
My question is, when you are now developing leaders, what's the priority? Is it the talent, the skill set, or is it the character or the person that is able to be taught? What's the priority? What should a young church that's wanting to now build, when they're looking at people, should they be looking at strictly talent or specialist, or should they be looking for someone that's maybe teachable that you can help them grow into that?
Character always outweighs charisma. Charisma is very important. Gifts are very important. But if they don't understand authority, they don't understand structure, they're not submissive. You can teach a person how to play the drums if they have that kind of ability. Mm-hmm. You can teach a person how to type on a computer. But you cannot teach loyalty.
Right.
You cannot teach integrity. Those are character issues. And so character always is more important than the charisma. I'm not downplaying charisma. Charisma is tremendous. But charisma can become cancer in the body, where you've got somebody that's using the church instead of being a part of the church.
Yeah. You know, as a pastor, one of the things I determined is I'm going to be here long term.
You have to.
And I want to surround myself with people that I can do life with.
Yes. That's right.
And what I have come to the conclusion is when I am putting someone in a position, or I'm hiring someone, or I'm firing someone, that it all centers around the heart. Do they have my heart? Mm-hmm. Do I have their heart? Because the talent might be lacking, and they might be suffering in that position, but if they have my heart, then we can go the distance.
Right. That's right.
But the moment that the heart is not there, then the journey stops without some type of heart transformation. And so I would encourage us as leaders that, like Dale said, you know, charisma is one thing. I love how one pastor says, character will keep you, will talent will take you. You know, and so talent can take us a lot of places, but it will be character that keeps us there.
That's exactly
and,
right.
And for me personally, as a pastor, it will be their heart that keeps. Because we see that in the church realm. We see people come and go in our churches all the time. And they can say they're not being fed. They can say it's not the children's ministry. They can, but really it's because we've not captured their heart. And they certainly haven't captured ours. And so we like Dale said, facilitating this, we want to capture people's hearts, because they might not like the way we preach, but if they love us and love God, They might not like that we don't have the best whatever, but we have their heart because it's family.
That's right. It's family, and we understand we have covenant relationships. I love what you said there. You got to think of yourself long term. We got to be committed to this for the long haul, to the end of this. This is not just something I'm doing. This is something God's called me to do and to be. And so to the end of my life, I want to be fulfilling the call of God.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's covenant relationships. It goes back to your calling it the heart.
Yeah. You know, you guys can't see because it's off camera, and I certainly don't want to embarrass her. But one of our teenagers, Savannah Blanchard, has come in because she's helping at the church.
Hi, Savannah.
And 9 years ago, Savannah was one of the only 3 children
That's
in
the
our
truth.
children's
I
ministry.
remember that.
And Dale gave me a word, a prophetic word, saying, you know, your worship is going to come from the children's ministry. And Savannah leads on Sunday morning piano and song.
That's right.
And Savannah is up here on an off day to help at the church.
That's beautiful.
And so, as a pastor, my desire is to one day see Savannah married, and then one day dedicate her kids to the Lord.
That's right.
You know, that's the long-term process.
That's right.
And so I love you, Savannah. So glad you're here. If you guys have questions, we definitely want to hear those. Feel free to message me right now. Pastor
Yeah,
Clint.
I got one I'd like to ask Brother Dale.
Sure.
You talked about the outside ministries, understanding the structure of the ministries going on in your church, but those leaders in your church that's got their own ministries outside the church.
Yeah.
Do you feel that could be a distraction from the church, or should that outside ministry still be able to bring back to the church?
Yeah, I don't see it as a problem at all because that's really who I am.
Right.
That's and I would be seeing myself as a problem. But I, you know, and I know I've been involved in ministry much longer than Pastor Vince.
Yeah.
But I've told him over and over, God called him to pastor this church,
Right.
not me. And I'm not going to try to usurp authority, tell him what to do. I'm going to try to serve him in every way I can, even though I have an international ministry, or I say I have, that God has, that he uses me in. And there are hundreds of pastors, and you know, I can talk about that all day. But I don't see that as a problem. I see that as an arm reaching out of this church, extending from this body. It's something, it's a win-win situation, in other words.
Right.
Well, I see a lot of times they feel like they're scared that you're going to take over their ministry.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But there's still a covering needs to be there. And
Let me tell you,
Yeah.
you never threaten great people.
Right.
It's only small people that get scared.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people have asked us throughout the years, how does that work? I mean, you've got Dale Yurton in your church, or Dale,
Yeah.
your son-in-law is your pastor. You know, how does that work? Whenever I hear that question, to me, it gives me an indication they don't understand authority.
I agree with that.
And so, like Dale said, I mean, because there's another dynamic. Not only a phenomenal man of God with an international ministry sitting in the church house serving, and a pastor over that individual, but also a father-son-in-law. You know,
Yeah.
you've got you've got that dynamic. So how does well, the best I can tell you is it operates beautifully, just like it should.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because we both understand authority.
That's it.
Like he
That's the
said, he
key.
doesn't try to take my, what you ought to do is this way. What you should do is that way, you know. Or, you know, hey, why don't you let me? There's not one hint of that.
Right.
And on the other flip side, there's times that I will come to him and say, Dale, you know, there's some questions I've got. What do you see in your spirit? And I'm going to him for advice, and him coming to me, now what do you want me to do, or how can I serve you? Right. And so there's a beautiful harmony that happens because ultimately it's not about family.
No.
It's not about position.
Right.
It's about understanding authority. Right. I know who I am.
Yes.
I know who God has established me at this church and not him, like he just said, and vice versa. I don't tell him, you know, what you ought to do in your ministry outside the church is this, this, and this.
Yes.
You know, and so I think, like he said, you don't threaten great people, as well as when you truly understand authority. Authority is not an under my thumb mindset. You're going to do what I say and how I want. I go to him just as much as he comes to me for direction.
Thank you.
There's a communication.
Absolutely.
Communication.
A lot of communication.
I see so many people call Jesus their Savior, but the truth is many of them cannot call him Lord. They're still trying, they want him to answer their prayers. They want to tell him what to do. Some of the biggest misunderstood doctrines in the Bible is authority, spiritual authority, the kingdom of God. There's so few people that really understand what you're even talking about when you start, because they have these misconceptions. They're looking at life through a knothole rather than seeing, and that knothole, it can be your ministry, it can be whatever that, and that's just a mistake. So if it's what it ought to be a win-win situation.
So, Dale, we have a great question. Mike Sexton, so good to have you on here.
Yes, hello,
Man,
Mike.
Love his brain. I love to talk to Mike and get his
Yes,
input.
I do too.
So I'm going to read this question out loud to everyone. It's already posted on the stream. I was just about getting ready to answer it when I want to bring it up to us. This is such a great question. Is a healthy church's organizational chart better reflected and understanding as roles lined up side by side as opposed to one boss over the others with subordinates?
Oh, yes, I definitely think so.
The answer I was putting is yes. Think about the fivefold ministry.
Yes, absolutely.
Jesus gave 5 leadership, if you would, for the church.
That's right.
Now, I think in our American church, we elevate one above the other. We call it the pastor. And yes, there needs to be a leader of that group.
Of
We
course.
see that in Acts as well.
That's right.
But I think, like the two of us, I count Dale as an apostle.
Right.
And so I go to him with what I feel in my spirit. Hey, will you check this? This is what I feel the direction. I think you're on the right track, yes. And I would encourage you to think this way as well as you're going down that road. Or I would hold off on that. That's several years down the road. Right. You do that now, you're going to get killed. And so so that understanding, an apostle, if you think about fivefold ministry, the apostle holds everything together, can touch every other aspect of ministry. Right. And so, Mike, I would say yes. That horizontal leadership, team leadership, like what we have here at Journey Church, is designed based on biblical structure.
Yes.
I think is the healthiest.
And I think if you'll think of it like a body, it's better, Christ being the head.
Right.
The pastor's not the head. The pastor is one of the fivefold ministry, which those are servants to the body. And the better servant you become to the body, the better minister you're fulfilling your role. Christ is the head. He's the brains of it all. And we're still trying to figure out, what we're supposed to be doing. But think of it more as a body, I think, is a better way of understanding authority.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Anyone else, gentlemen? Y'all have some input? Pastor John Richards. So grateful for him being able to put this together for us to be able to communicate.
Yes, absolutely.
Man, so appreciate Pastor John and his wife, Crystal.
And it's just so good to be back with, not just online now, but we are live because that touch is so important, just being together. It's good for brethren to dwell together in unity.
I agree. Well, I'm going to give you one final challenge, and if you just logged on, I encourage you, I highly implore you to go back and watch this lesson because it is just chock full of so many nuggets of biblical truths. And I would encourage you as you are at home, as you are doing church at home, as you're doing online viewing and being socially distant and taking care of your body, definitely continue to do that. But I want to ask you to also take care of the church body. And one of the ways that you can do that is by becoming a giver to the Living Faith. We as a church, We believe in missions overseas. That's one of the things we love about the Living Faith Network. And I would implore you, if you haven't already become a member of the Living Faith Network, please visit
Yes.
DaleYerton.com. That's DaleYerton.com. On that website, you can see what's happening. In fact, if we could, Dale, before we sign off, could you give us an update about the food that's been distributed to countless pastors around the world?
It's what I call the pandemic miracle, because God just gave us this opportunity. And today we're sending out another 3,000, which means we distributed over $32,000 at this point. And money's still coming in. As it comes in, we simply send it out. And we've helped to feed over 500 pastors. And this is, I'm talking about food for 2 weeks or food for 4 weeks. It depends on the country they are and the program they're using. Over 500 pastors in 11 different nations around the world. So that's just one of the opportunities that God has given us, and one of the things that we're doing through the Living Faith. When you got hungry people, you feed them. You just take care of the needs.
That's right. And so you can have an opportunity to do that as well. And ways you can do that is by logging on to DaleYerton.com and then become a monthly supporter. You know, just $10 a month that can be automatically deducted from your account is going to help reach so many people.
That's right.
So I hope you'll join us again next month for City Changers. God bless you. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us. We look forward to connecting with you soon.